The old transport ship landed with a heavy thud on the cracked concrete pad, sending up clouds of red dust that had been settling on Haven's Rest for decades. David Walsh shut off the engines and looked through the dirty viewport at what was supposed to be their new home. The military base stretched out before them, a collection of weathered buildings and rusted equipment that had been abandoned so long that native vines were trying to reclaim the structures. "Well, it's not much to look at," Emma said from the co-pilot seat, wiping sweat from her forehead. The cooling system had failed 2 days into their journey, and they had spent the last week sweating in the cramped cabin. "But it's ours." David nodded and started the shutdown sequence. They had saved for 15 years to buy this place, pooling their military pensions and the small inheritance from Emma's parents. Most people thought they were crazy for wanting to live on a frontier world, especially one with such a dark history. Haven's Rest had been a terraforming project that went wrong. The colonial government had tried to turn it into a garden world, but something in the soil killed most earth plants. After spending billions of credits, they gave up and sold off the abandoned facilities for almost nothing. The couple had different plans. They wanted to grow food for the small mining colonies in the system. The soil might not work for roses and apple trees, but it could support the hardy crops that fed spacers and asteroid miners. More importantly, they wanted peace and quiet. After 30 years of military service, Emma opened the cargo bay while David ran the post-flight checks. Their belongings filled only a small corner of the bay: 2 cases of clothes, a box of personal items, farming equipment, and enough supplies to last 3 months. Everything they owned in the galaxy could fit in the back of a small truck. The air outside was thin but breathable. The terraforming had worked well enough to create an atmosphere, even if it could not make the planet into Earth. David breathed deeply and smiled. No recycled air, no crowded stations, no noise from 1,000 people living too close together. Just wind through empty buildings and the distant sound of something that might have been birds. They spent the first week making one of the smaller buildings livable. The main power grid still worked, though it groaned and sparked whenever they turned on too many lights. The water pumps needed new seals and half the windows were cracked, but it was home. Emma set up a medical station in what had been an office, while David claimed the old communications room as his workshop. On their 8th day, David decided to explore the rest of the base. The property deed listed 47 buildings on 800 acres, but they had only seen the main compound. He packed a lunch and a portable scanner, then set out to see what they had really bought. Most of the outer buildings were empty shells, storage facilities that had been stripped bare, vehicle bays with nothing but stains on the concrete floors, and housing blocks that animals had turned into dens. David made notes about which structures could be repaired and which were beyond saving. The farming operation would need equipment storage and processing facilities, so every building mattered. He was walking toward a cluster of buildings near the eastern fence when his scanner started beeping. The readings made no sense. It was detecting a large heat signature, but the temperature was too low to be machinery and too steady to be a fire. David adjusted the settings and scanned again. Whatever it was huge and alive. The fence around this section was different from the rest of the base. Instead of simple chain link, it was made of thick metal posts connected by heavy cables. Warning signs in 3 languages covered every post, but they were too faded to read clearly. David could make out a few words in standard. Danger, authorized. Personnel only, lethal force approved. He followed the fence until he found a gate. The lock was electronic, but the power had been cut decades ago. The manual release was corroded shut, but a few hits with a rock knocked it loose. The gate swung, open with a screech of rusted hinges. Inside the compound was a single massive structure. It looked like a bunker, built from reinforced concrete and metal plating. There were no windows, just air vents near the roof, and a single heavy door. But that was not what made David stop and stare. Chains. Dozens of them, each link as thick as his arm, stretched from anchor points around the bunker to something in the shadows behind it. The metal was black and seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. David had seen similar material in high-security prisons, but never this much in one place. He walked slowly around the bunker, following the chains. They led to what he first thought was a small hill covered in dead vegetation. But as he got closer, he realized the shape was wrong. Hills did not have regular curves and angles. This looked more like a building that had been abandoned so long that plants had grown over it. David activated his scanner again. The heat signature was coming from inside the hill. He reached out and brushed away some of the dead vines and moss. Underneath was not concrete or metal, but something that felt like stone. Smooth stone that was warm to the touch. A section of the covering fell away, revealing what looked like a giant scale. It was dark green with hints of blue larger than David's hand, and definitely not made by humans. He cleared away more of the debris, uncovering more scales, all connected in an overlapping pattern. Then the hill moved. It was just a slight shift, like someone breathing in their sleep. But it was enough to make David jump backwards. The chains, rattled as whatever was under there adjusted its position. David's heart was pounding as he realized what he was looking at. It was alive, and it was enormous. David cleared away more vegetation, working carefully to avoid disturbing the creature. The scales continued in a pattern that suggested a body longer than the transport ship they had arrived in. Near what he thought was the front end, he found a section where the covering was thinner. Underneath was a massive eye, closed, but clearly, visible under a transparent membrane. The eye opened. David found himself staring into an orb larger than his head, with an iris that shifted from gold to green as it focused on him. The eye blinked once, slowly. Then the creature made a sound that was part growl and part sigh. It was trying to speak. The words were in no language David recognized, but his military translation implant kicked in after a few seconds. The device had been programmed with over 3,000 languages and dialects, though most of them were long dead. "Please," the creature whispered, its voice like distant thunder. "Let me die." David stood frozen, staring at the massive eye that watched him with what could only be described as hope. He had found a dragon, chained and abandoned in his backyard, and its first words were a plea for death. Emma was cleaning her medical equipment when David burst through the door, covered in dirt and breathing hard. He had been gone for hours and she was starting to worry. The expression on his face made her set down the scanner she was calibrating and give him her full attention. "We have a problem," he said, then paused and shook his head. "No, that's not right. We have a situation. A big one." Emma waited while he got himself a glass of water and sat down at their small table. David was not the type to panic, but something had clearly shaken him. She had seen that look before, usually right before he told her about some impossible repair job the military had assigned him. "There's a dragon chained up behind the bunker in Sector 7, he said finally. Emma blinked. "A what?" "A dragon. Like from the old stories, except this one is real and it's been chained there for who knows how long." David pulled out his scanner and showed her the readings. "Look at these biosigns, it's definitely alive, but barely. I think it's been slowly starving." Emma studied the display. The heat signature was unlike anything in her medical database, but the patterns were consistent with a large mammal under severe stress. Heart rate too slow, body temperature fluctuating, signs of malnutrition and dehydration. If these readings were accurate, whatever David had found was dying. "It talked to you?" she asked. The translation implant picked up fragments. "It asked me to let it die." David rubbed his face with both hands. "Emma, I think we're the first people to find it in decades, maybe longer." Emma was already packing her medical bag. "Show me." They took the small utility vehicle, loading it with water, basic medical supplies, and some of their emergency food rations. The ride to Sector 7 was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Emma had seen plenty of strange things during her military career, but never anything like this. The compound looked exactly as David had described it. The massive chains, the bunker, and what she now recognized as a living creature covered in years of accumulated debris. But seeing it in person was different. The scale of it was overwhelming. The chains alone must have weighed several tons, each. The dragon's eye was open when they approached, tracking their movement with obvious intelligence. Emma knelt down beside the great head and began clearing away more of the covering vegetation. The scales underneath were dull and scarred, marked by years of neglect and probably injury. "Hello," she said softly, the way she would speak to any patient. "My name is Emma. This is David. We want to help you." The dragon made that thunder sound again, and the translation came through more clearly this time. "Help? No help. Too late. Too long." Emma ran her hands over the visible scales, checking for injuries and trying to assess the creature's condition. The dragon flinched at first, then gradually relaxed as she worked. Its skin was dry and hot, covered in small wounds that had never properly healed. "David, I need you to start clearing more of this debris. I want to see how bad the injuries are." She opened her medical bag and pulled out a portable scanner. "And we're going to need a lot more water." They worked for 3 hours, carefully removing years of accumulated dirt and dead plants. The dragon lay still and let them work, occasionally making soft sounds that the translator rendered as "careful" or "thank you." Emma had never heard such pain in a voice before. By the time they were finished, they could see the full extent of the creature's condition. The dragon was easily 60 feet long, with wings that had been folded so long that the membrane between the wing bones had torn in several places. The chains were not just around its neck, but also around its legs, and the base of its wings designed to prevent any movement stronger than breathing. The worst part was the wounds. The chains had rubbed against the dragon's scales for so long that they had worn through in several places, creating deep gouges that became infected and then scarred over. Some of the cuts were recent, suggesting that the dragon still struggled, occasionally against its bonds. "This is torture," Emma said, her voice tight with anger. "Someone did this on purpose." The dragon's eye focused on her face. "Syl," it said, the word carrying a weight of old hatred. "The hegemony of Syl used me, used us all. When humans came, they ran. Left us here." Emma's blood went cold. The hegemony of Syl had been humanity's first major enemy in space. The war had ended before she was born, but every military officer knew the stories. The hegemony had conquered dozens of worlds using what human intelligence called biological weapons of mass destruction. Dragons, according to the reports, served as living warships for hegemony fleets. "How long have you been here?" David asked. The dragon closed its eyes and was quiet for a long moment. Time, difficult. Seasons change. Many seasons. Stars move. Another pause. 200 years, maybe more. 2 centuries. Emma tried to imagine being chained in one place for 200 years, slowly starving, with no hope of rescue. The fact that the dragon was still sane was a miracle. "What's your name?" she asked. "Name?" The dragon seemed confused by the question. "Syl called me Weapon 741. Before that I was Raven. Raven of the High Peaks." "Raven," Emma repeated. "That's a good name." She spent the next hour treating the dragon's wounds as best she could with her limited supplies. The infected areas needed antibiotics, but she was not sure human medications would work on alien biology. The dehydration was severe, but Raven drank greedily from the water containers they had brought. David had been examining the chains while Emma worked. "These are quantum-locked durasteel," he said finally. "Military-grade restraints, but the locking mechanism is on the outside of each shackle, which means they were designed to be opened by someone else." "The hegemony," Raven said weakly. "They had keys, remote controls, could tighten chains if I disobeyed." Emma felt sick. This was not just imprisonment, it was systematic torture designed to break the dragon's will completely. The fact that Raven was still capable of hope after 2 centuries of this treatment spoke to an incredible strength of spirit. "Can you break them?" she asked David. "Maybe. The quantum locks need a specific frequency to open, but the mechanism is old. If I can build a scanner to analyze the lock structure, I might be able to find the right frequency." He paused. "But it would take time, weeks, maybe months." Raven made a sound that might have been laughter. "Time I have. Hope. Hope is new." They returned to the compound the next day with more supplies. Emma brought stronger medications and better equipment for treating Raven's injuries. David hauled, scanning equipment and tools for analyzing the chain locks. They established a routine. Emma would tend to Raven's medical needs while David worked on understanding the restraint system. Over the following weeks, Raven began to tell them her story. Dragons, she explained, were not native to any single world. They were an ancient species that traveled between stars long before most races had developed spaceflight. They were scholars and explorers, not warriors, despite their fearsome appearance. The hegemony of Syl had hunted dragons to near extinction, capturing the survivors and using them as weapons of war. Dragons could breathe fire, but their real power lay in their ability to manipulate gravitational fields and energy. A single dragon could destroy a city or crack open a moon if properly motivated. "How did they make you fight?" Emma asked one afternoon while cleaning a particularly bad wound on Raven's neck. "Pain," Raven replied simply. "And hostages. They captured young ones. Hatchlings. Said they would kill them if we refused to fight." Emma's hand stilled. "What happened to them? I do not know. When the war ended, everything scattered. Some dragons escaped. Some died. Some, like me, were left behind." Raven's voice carried a deep sadness. "I was the last one in this sector when humans arrived. My handler ran when your ships appeared. Left me here with these chains and no food." David looked up from the lock he was analyzing. "Why didn't the human forces find you after the war?" "Hidden," Raven said. "This base was listed as a supply depot. No reason to search carefully. And dragons can, how do you say, phase out when we are weak, become partially invisible. I hid when humans came to strip the base." That explained why the dragon had not been discovered for 2 centuries. Emma continued her work, but her mind was racing. According to human records, dragons had been willing partners in hegemony warfare. The idea that they had been enslaved and tortured into fighting changed everything about the war. "Raven," she said carefully, "how many dragons were there before the hegemony?" "Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. We lived long lives, traveled far, had great libraries, shared knowledge between worlds." Raven's eye fixed on Emma's face. "Now?" "I do not know. A few dozen, maybe. Scattered across the galaxy, most hiding." Emma and David exchanged glances. An entire species, nearly extinct because of a war that humanity had fought without understanding the true situation. The dragons had not been enemies at all, but prisoners forced to fight or watch their children die. That night, Emma sat by their small window and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, the last few dragons were hiding in caves and abandoned stations, believing that the entire galaxy wanted them dead. Meanwhile, humans celebrated their victory over the hegemony, never knowing they had inadvertently participated in genocide. "We have to help her," she said to David. "I know," he replied. "I'm working as fast as I can on those locks." "No, I mean more than that. If Raven is right, there are others out there. Other dragons, other species that the hegemony enslaved. We can't save them all, but maybe we can start." David nodded slowly. "First, we free Raven. Then we figure out what comes next." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of Raven singing. It was a mournful song in a language the translators could not parse, but the emotion was universal. It was the sound of someone who had given up hope, learning to hope again. Rain drummed against the small window of their makeshift home as David studied the latest scans of the quantum locks. 3 weeks of constant analysis had finally yielded results. The lock mechanisms were incredibly complex, but they had one fatal flaw. They were designed to contain a weakened dragon, not a healthy one. Emma walked in from her daily visit to Raven, shaking water from her coat. The dragon's condition had improved dramatically since they started providing regular food and medical care. The infected wounds were healing, and Raven's scales had begun to show hints of their original brilliant color beneath the scars. "How is she today?" David asked without looking up from his work. "Stronger. Much stronger." Emma poured herself coffee from the pot they kept constantly brewing. She asked me something interesting today. She wanted to know if we had children. David glanced up. What did you tell her? The truth. That we tried. For years, but it never happened. Emma sat down across from him. She said something about dragon memory sharing, how they pass knowledge and experiences from one generation to the next. She's been alone so long that she's starting to forget things her parents taught her. This was new information. David set down his tools and gave Emma his full attention. What kind of things? Cultural memories mostly. Songs, stories, the locations of important places, but also technical knowledge. Apparently, dragons were master engineers before the hegemony enslaved them. They built cities that floated in gas giant atmospheres and space habitats that could last for millennia. David felt a chill of excitement. If dragons possessed advanced engineering knowledge, it might explain how the hegemony had conquered so much territory so quickly. They had not just enslaved dragons as weapons, but as living repositories of technology. Did she offer to share any of this knowledge with us? Emma shook her head. She's afraid. Memory sharing is intimate for dragons. It creates a permanent bond between individuals. She's not sure she trusts us enough for that level of connection. David understood the hesitation. After 2 centuries of imprisonment and torture, trust would not come easily. But he also sensed an opportunity. If they could prove their commitment to helping Raven, she might be willing to share information that could help other enslaved species. I think I know how to free her, he said, showing Emma his latest calculations. The quantum locks are synchronized to her biorhythm. As she gets stronger, the locks actually become more vulnerable to frequency disruption. Emma studied the data. What do you need? Power. Lots of it, and some components from the old reactor. David pulled up a schematic of the base's power grid. If I can build a quantum disruptor using the reactor's primary coupling, I should be able to generate enough interference to break the locks. Should be able to? There's risk, David admitted. If I get the frequency wrong, the backlash could kill her, and if the disruptor overloads, it might take half the base with it. Emma was quiet for a long moment, studying the plans. What does Raven think? I haven't told her yet. I wanted to run it by you first. They discussed the technical details for another hour, identifying potential problems and backup plans. The work was complex and dangerous, but not impossible. David had built similar devices during his military service, though never on this scale. The next morning they presented the plan to Raven. The dragon listened carefully as David explained the process and the risks involved. When he finished, she was quiet for so long that Emma began to worry she had fallen asleep. Freedom, Raven said finally. I had stopped dreaming of it. The word feels strange in my mouth. You don't have to decide right now, Emma said. We can wait as long as you need. No. Raven's voice was stronger than they had ever heard it. I have waited 200 years. I will not wait any longer, but first there is something I must show you. Raven closed her eyes and began to hum in a low, resonant tone. The sound seemed to come from deep within her chest, vibrating through the ground and into their bones. As the humming continued, the air around the dragon began to shimmer. Emma gasped as images formed in the shimmer. It was like watching a holographic movie, but the images had weight and substance. She could smell the air of alien worlds and feel the heat of distant suns. The first image showed a city unlike anything Emma had ever seen. Towers of crystal and metal spiraled upward from floating platforms, connected by bridges that arced gracefully through open air. Dragons soared between the structures, their scales reflecting sunlight in brilliant patterns. This was sanctuary. Raven's voice echoed strangely, as if it was coming from inside the vision. The greatest of our cities built in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant. 10 million dragons called it home. The image shifted, showing the interior of the city. Dragons worked alongside other species Emma did not recognize, sharing knowledge and creating art that defied description. It was a civilization built on cooperation and mutual respect, the opposite of everything humans had been told about hegemony worlds. Then the vision changed. Ships appeared in the sky above Sanctuary, dark vessels that bristled with weapons. The attack came without warning. Energy beams lanced down from the ships, slicing through the crystal towers and sending platforms tumbling into the gas giant's depths. Emma watched in horror as dragons tried to defend their city. They fought with incredible power, manipulating gravity to crush attacking ships and breathing plasma that could melt steel. But there were too many attackers, and they had come prepared for dragon abilities. The hegemony ships fired special weapons that created zones of disrupted spacetime. Dragons caught in these zones lost their ability to phase or manipulate energy. They fell from the sky like stones, to be captured in nets of quantum-locked chain. This is how it began, Raven explained as the vision showed capture ships hauling away hundreds of dragons. They did not conquer us in war. They murdered our families and enslaved the survivors. The vision shifted again, showing other worlds, other species. Emma saw beings of living crystal forced to build weapons that could shatter planets. Gaseous entities that could predict the future were trapped in containment fields and used to plan military campaigns. An entire race of artificial intelligences was enslaved to run hegemony computer systems. All of us, Raven said as the images faded. Every species the hegemony used as weapons was a slave. They conquered the galaxy by enslaving its most powerful inhabitants and turning them against their own people. David found his voice first. How many species? Hundreds, maybe thousands. The hegemony ruled for 3,000 years before humans arrived. They had time to perfect their methods. Raven opened her eyes and focused on Emma. When humanity defeated the hegemony, most humans believed they had won a war. They did not realize they had liberated a prison. Emma felt sick. Human history books described the war as a heroic struggle against an evil empire. Museums displayed captured hegemony weapons as trophies of victory. Children learned songs about brave human pilots who defeated dragon squadrons in single combat. None of it was true. The dragons, the crystal beings, all the terrifying weapons of the hegemony, had been victims, not villains. Why didn't any of the liberated species contact humanity after the war? David asked. Fear, Raven replied simply. We had been slaves so long that freedom felt like a trap. When the hegemony fell, most of us just hid. We expected humanity to replace the hegemony as our new masters. But we didn't, Emma said. No. Humanity did something unprecedented. You went home. You could have claimed hegemony territory as your own, enslaved the species you found there. Instead, you left. Most of us did not understand this behavior. David was building up to ask another question when his communication device chimed. He had set up a perimeter monitoring system around the base and something had triggered the sensors. According to the display, a ship had just entered the atmosphere and was heading in their direction. We have visitors, he announced, showing the others the sensor readings. Raven's scales darkened with fear. Hegemony? Unknown. But they're flying a colonial government transponder. David was already moving toward their equipment. Emma, we need to hide Raven. If the government finds out about her. Wait, Raven said. Her voice had changed, becoming deeper and more resonant. I will not hide again. I have hidden for 200 years, and I am tired of hiding. The air around Raven began to shimmer again, but this time it was not a memory vision. The dragon was becoming translucent, her massive form fading until she was barely visible. It was like looking at a reflection in disturbed water. Partial, phasing, she explained, her voice now sounding distant. I can maintain this for several hours. They will not see me unless they know what to look for. David nodded and ran for the main compound. Emma stayed with Raven, amazed by the display of power. The dragon had not just become invisible, she had shifted partially out of phase with normal matter. It was technology that would revolutionize human understanding of physics. The ship turned out to be a routine inspection vessel from the colonial government. The pilot was a bored bureaucrat who wanted to verify that the Walshes were actually living on the property they had purchased. David showed him around the main buildings while Emma kept the inspector away from Sector 7. Nice setup you have here, the inspector said, making notes on his tablet. Most people who buy these old bases give up within a year. Too isolated, too much work to make them livable. We like the peace and quiet, David replied, guiding the man back toward his ship. Planning to start farming next season. Good soil here once you know how to work with it. Just avoid the eastern sector. Some kind of contamination from the old military operations. Nothing dangerous, but it kills most crops. David nodded, wondering if the contamination was actually some lingering effect of Raven's presence. Dragons apparently had more influence on their environment than human scientists realized. The inspector finished his paperwork and departed, leaving the base quiet once again. David found Emma and Raven waiting for him in Sector 7. The dragon had returned to full visibility and was looking more alert than he had ever seen her. They did not find me, Raven said with something that might have been satisfaction. I had forgotten how good it feels to choose my own visibility. Are you ready to choose your own freedom? David asked. Raven was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, I am ready. But David, Emma, you must understand something. When I am free, I will not simply fly away. I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid with gratitude alone. You don't owe us anything, Emma said. Yes, I do. You have given me back my life, my dignity, my hope. In return, I will share with you what I know. The locations of other enslaved beings, the technology of my people, the true history of this galaxy. Raven's eyes glowed with inner fire. Together, we will finish what humanity started when you defeated the hegemony. We will free those who are still in chains. David felt a thrill of excitement mixed with fear. They had bought a simple farming property and discovered a gateway to galactic liberation. The work would be dangerous, probably impossible, but it was also the most important thing anyone could do. First things first, he said, shouldering his tool bag. Let's get you out of those chains. The quantum disruptor hummed with barely contained power as David made the final adjustments to its frequency generator. 3 days of non-stop work had produced a device that looked like a cross between a cannon and a telescope, built from salvaged reactor components and held together with determination. Emma checked the medical monitor she had attached to Raven, ready to intervene if the dragon's vital signs showed distress. Raven lay perfectly still, her great head resting on the ground, while the massive chains stretched taut around her body. She had not moved for hours, conserving her strength for what was to come. The dragon knew better than anyone how dangerous this moment would be. Are you certain about this? Emma asked for the 10th time that morning. We could wait, try to find another way. There is no other way, Raven replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. These chains were designed by the greatest engineers of the hegemony. Only overwhelming force will break them. I trust David's work. David appreciated the confidence, but his hands were still shaking as he powered up the disruptor. The device drew energy directly from the base's reactor, channeling enough electricity to power a small city into a focused beam of quantum interference. If his calculations were wrong, the backlash would kill all 3 of them instantly. Beginning frequency. Scan, he announced, his finger hovering over the activation switch. Raven, if you feel any pain, tell me immediately. The disruptor fired with a sound like tearing metal. A beam of twisted light struck the first chain, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the quantum-locked durasteel began to glow, its molecular structure vibrating at frequencies that human eyes could not properly process. Raven gasped as the chain around her neck suddenly went slack. 200 years of constant pressure vanished in an instant, and she lifted her head for the first time since the hegemony had abandoned her. Tears of pure relief ran down her scaled cheeks. It works, she whispered. By the ancient stars, it actually works. David moved to the next chain, adjusting the frequency to match its specific quantum signature. This one fought harder, sparking and smoking before finally giving way with a crack like thunder. The shackle around Raven's left foreleg opened and fell to the ground with a crash that shook the earth. One by one, the chains fell away. Each broken restraint revealed more of Raven's true form, scales that shifted from deep green to brilliant emerald as circulation returned to long-compressed areas. Her wings, folded and bound for 2 centuries, stretched slowly as feeling returned to damaged muscles. The final chain was the largest, wrapped around the base of Raven's wings where they joined her body. David had saved it for last, because it would require the most power to break. The disruptor was already running hot from the previous attempts, and he was not sure it could handle another full power discharge. "This is the dangerous one," he warned. "The frequency is different, and I'll have to use maximum power if something goes wrong." "Do it," Raven said firmly. "I would rather die free than live one more day in chains." David fired the disruptor. At full power, the beam struck the final chain and held steady, pouring quantum interference into the durasteel links. The metal began to glow white-hot, then shifted through colors that had no names. Reality itself seemed to bend around the chain as its quantum locks fought against the disruptor's assault. Then everything happened at once. The chain exploded in a flash of light that temporarily blinded everyone present. The disruptor overloaded and shut down with a shower of sparks. And Raven, for the first time in 200 years, was completely free. The dragon rose to her full height, and Emma finally understood the true scale of what they had rescued. Raven was magnificent, her scales gleaming like jewels in the afternoon sun. Her wings spread wide, casting shadows across the entire compound. She was not just large, she was majestic, a creature of legend made flesh. But more than her physical transformation was the change in her presence. The defeated, hopeless being they had found chained in the dirt was gone, replaced by something ancient and powerful that made the air itself feel charged with energy. "I am free," Raven said, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated in their bones. "Free to choose my own path, free to remember who I was before the chains, free to decide what I will become." She looked down at David and Emma with eyes that glowed like stars. "You have given me the greatest gift possible. How can I repay such kindness?" Before either human could answer, David's perimeter sensors began screaming warnings. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace around Haven's Rest, moving in attack formation toward the surface. The sensor readings showed vessel designs that were not in any human database. "Hegemony remnants," Raven said, her voice suddenly cold as winter. "They must have detected the quantum discharge when the chains broke. They have come to reclaim their property." 6 ships entered the atmosphere, sleek vessels that moved with predatory grace. They were smaller than human warships but radiated an aura of menace that made David's skin crawl. These were ships built for hunting, designed to capture rather than destroy. "They think I am still chained," Raven continued, her scales beginning to glow with inner fire. "They expect to find their weapon waiting to be reclaimed. They are about to learn how wrong they are." The lead ship opened fire with energy weapons meant to stun rather than kill. The beams struck Raven directly, crackling over her scales in patterns of blue lightning. For a moment, David feared the weapons might still work, that 2 centuries of captivity had permanently weakened the dragon. Raven absorbed the energy blasts without even flinching. Then she opened her mouth and breathed fire. But this was not the simple flame breath of human mythology. This was plasma contained within manipulated gravitational fields, fire that burned at the temperature of stellar cores. The beam lanced upward and struck the lead ship, not destroying it but enveloping it in a cage of controlled fusion that held it motionless in the sky. The other ships scattered, trying to bring their weapons to bear on a target that was no longer helpless. Raven leaped into the air, her wings catching the wind with a sound like distant thunder. 200 years of forced inactivity vanished as she remembered what it meant to fly. David and Emma watched in amazement as Raven engaged 6 ships simultaneously. She moved through 3-dimensional space like a dancer, always exactly where the enemy weapons were not. When she breathed fire, ships stopped moving. When she roared, their electronics failed. When she simply looked at them with those star-bright eyes, their pilots made mistakes born of ancient genetic terror. But the most impressive thing was her restraint. Raven could have destroyed every ship in seconds, turning them into expanding clouds of superheated vapor. Instead, she disabled them one by one, using just enough force to stop them without killing their crews. She was demonstrating not just power but wisdom. The battle ended when Raven landed on the largest ship and began speaking in a language that predated human civilization. Her words carried across the radio frequencies, and David's translator struggled to keep up with the ancient dialect. "I am Raven of the high peaks, daughter of thunder and starlight, keeper of the ancient ways. You enslaved my people and destroyed my world, but you did not break my spirit. I am free now, and I choose mercy over vengeance. Depart this place and spread the word. The age of chains is ending." The ships powered down their weapons and began climbing back toward orbit. David realized that Raven had not just defeated them, she had shown them something they had never seen before, a dragon choosing to spare those who had wronged her. It was a message that would spread throughout what remained of hegemony space. "Why did you let them go?" Emma asked as Raven landed beside them. "Because someone must carry word of what happened here," Raven replied. "They came expecting to find a broken weapon. Instead, they found a free dragon allied with humans who chose compassion over conquest. That news will reach others who are still in chains." David checked his sensors and confirmed that all 6 ships were leaving the system. Won't they just come back with more ships? Perhaps. But now they know that humans are our allies, not our masters. And they know that at least one dragon has chosen to stand with humanity rather than against it. Raven folded her wings and looked at both humans with obvious affection. This is only the beginning. There are others out there, other species enslaved by the hegemony, other individuals chained in forgotten places. We have work to do. Emma packed up her medical equipment while David salvaged what he could from the burned-out disruptor. The quantum frequencies he had used to break Raven's chains could be adapted to work on other hegemony restraint systems. They had discovered not just how to free one dragon, but how to break the bonds that held an entire galaxy in servitude. "Where do we start?" David asked. Raven shared with them a memory vision that showed 17 different star systems, each containing the quantum signature of active restraint chains. 17 locations where enslaved beings waited for rescue that might never come. "We start with the closest one," she said. "A crystalline entity trapped on a mining station in the Vega system. The hegemony used her ability to see through solid matter to locate valuable minerals. She has been alone for 150 years. David looked at Emma, seeing his own determination reflected in her eyes. They had come to Haven's Rest, seeking a quiet retirement. Instead, they had discovered a mission that would define the rest of their lives. "Then we'd better get started," Emma said, shouldering her medical bag. "We have a galaxy to liberate." Above them, Raven spread her wings and roared her defiance at the stars. The sound carried across the empty base, a declaration that the age of slavery was ending and the age of freedom had begun. News of the dragon's liberation spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within days of the battle at Haven's Rest, every major news network was running stories about the impossible alliance between humans and a creature that was supposed to be extinct. Most governments dismissed the reports as hoaxes or propaganda, but the footage was too clear and the witnesses too credible to ignore completely. David watched the news broadcasts with mixed feelings as he prepared their ship for the journey to Vega. The old transport had been upgraded with salvaged hegemony technology that Raven provided, including shields that could deflect quantum weapons and engines that bent spacetime around the vessel. It was no longer just a farming ship, but a rescue vessel capable of reaching the most dangerous corners of the galaxy. Emma was in the medical bay, synthesizing treatments for species she had never encountered before. Raven's shared memories provided biological data about dozens of enslaved races, each requiring different approaches to healing. The crystalline entity they planned to rescue first would need light-based therapies and mineral supplements that Emma was preparing from raw elements. "Are you sure about this?" David asked, as Raven settled into the cargo bay that had been converted into her living space. The dragon was too large for conventional passenger areas, but she seemed comfortable surrounded by the supplies and equipment they would need for their mission. "I am sure that doing nothing is not an option," Raven replied. "For 2 centuries I told myself that someone else would come, that rescue would arrive eventually. I was wrong. Sometimes if you want something to change, you must be willing to change it yourself. The journey to Vega took 3 days, even with their improved engines. During the trip, Raven shared more memory visions about their target. The crystalline entity was called Shimmer by her own people, though the hegemony had designated her as Sensor Unit 12. She could see through solid matter and detect energy signatures from vast distances, abilities that made her invaluable for locating mineral deposits. The mining station where Shimmer was imprisoned floated in the asteroid belt around Vega's 4th planet. It had been abandoned when the hegemony fell, but automated systems still maintained minimal life support and the restraint fields that held Shimmer captive. She had spent 150 years alone, slowly going insane from isolation and sensory deprivation. "How do we even communicate with her?" Emma asked as they approached the station. "She's not organic like you. Will the translators work?" "Crystalline entities communicate through light patterns and harmonic vibrations," Raven explained. "I can translate, but only if she is still capable of coherent thought. Isolation affects their species differently than it affects dragons or humans." The mining station was a massive structure built around a captured asteroid. Most of its facilities were dark and cold, powered down decades ago when the last hegemony overseer abandoned his post. But deep in the station's core, sensors detected a faint energy signature that pulsed with the rhythm of a living heartbeat. They docked at the main airlock and made their way through corridors that had not seen light in decades. The station's automated systems recognized their presence and activated emergency lighting, casting eerie shadows on walls covered with hegemony script. David carried a portable version of his quantum disruptor, while Emma brought medical equipment adapted for non-organic physiology. The restraint chamber was located at the station's center, surrounded by layers of security doors that had long since been disabled. Inside, they found Shimmer suspended in a field of twisted energy that prevented her from moving or using her natural abilities. David had expected to find another creature tortured into submission, but Shimmer was different from Raven in every way possible. She looked like a living sculpture made from faceted crystal, her surface reflecting light and patterns that hurt to look at directly. She was beautiful and alien and completely motionless. "Is she alive?" Emma whispered. Raven approached the energy field and began producing harmonics that resonated through the crystalline structure. Shimmer's surface flickered once, then began pulsing with faint light. The patterns were random at first, but gradually organized into something that might have been communication. "She is alive, but barely," Raven translated. "The isolation has damaged her mind. She thinks we are hallucinations brought on by madness." Emma stepped forward and activated her medical scanner. The readings were unlike anything in her database, but the patterns suggested extreme stress and malnutrition. Shimmer was slowly dying, her crystalline structure developing fractures that could not heal while she remained in the restraint field. "Can you break her free?" she asked David. David studied the energy field with his instruments. It was similar to the quantum locks that had held Raven, but more complex. The field was designed to disrupt Shimmer's ability to phase through solid matter while also preventing her from generating the harmonic frequencies that her species use to communicate. "I think so, but it will take time. The field generators are integrated into the station's structure. I'll have to disable them one by one without causing a cascade failure that could kill her." They set up a base camp in the chamber and began the careful work of liberation. David traced power conduits and analyzed field generators, while Emma monitored Shimmer's vital signs. Raven maintained a constant dialogue with the imprisoned entity, using light patterns and harmonics to convince her that rescue was real. It took 2 days to safely disable the restraint field. When the last generator shut down, Shimmer collapsed to the floor of her prison, her crystalline body ringing like a bell as it struck the metal. For a terrifying moment, Emma thought they were too late. Then Shimmer began to glow. Light poured from every facet of her crystal structure, flooding the chamber with brilliance that was somehow warm and welcoming instead of blinding. The light carried meaning, emotions and thoughts transmitted directly through photons. Even without translation, David and Emma could feel Shimmer's overwhelming gratitude and disbelief. Free, Raven translated as the light pattern stabilized into coherent communication. She says she is free, and she cannot believe it is real. Shimmer rose from the floor, her movements graceful despite decades of forced immobility. She was smaller than Raven, but no less magnificent, her crystal body refracting the chamber's lights into rainbow patterns that danced across the walls. When she looked at David and Emma, her light pulsed with colors that conveyed wonder and hope. She wants to know why, Raven continued translating. Why humans would risk their lives to free someone they had never met. Emma found herself speaking directly to Shimmer, trusting that Raven would translate her words into the appropriate light patterns. Because no one should be alone. Because slavery is wrong, no matter who the victim is. Because we found out what really happened during the war, and we want to make it right. Shimmer's response was a cascade of light so beautiful that Emma felt tears on her cheeks. The crystalline entity was expressing concepts that human language could not capture, emotions that required photons and harmonics to fully convey. She offers herself as our ally, Raven translated. She says her people believed that all other species were enemies after the hegemony enslaved them. But humans have proven that some species can choose compassion over conquest. She wants to help us find others who are still in chains. Over the following days, Shimmer shared her knowledge of hegemony prison sites. Her ability to see through solid matter had given her insight into the Empire's hidden facilities that even Raven lacked. She knew the locations of gas giant prisons where energy beings were contained in magnetic bottles, space stations where artificial intelligences were trapped in logic loops, and planet-bound facilities where shapeshifters were held in stasis fields. The scale of the liberation effort was overwhelming. Hundreds of species, thousands of individuals, scattered across the galaxy and held by restraint systems that would require years to understand and defeat. But they also had advantages that no previous rescue attempt had possessed. Raven's knowledge of dragon technology, Shimmer's ability to locate hidden facilities, and human engineering expertise that could adapt to any challenge. Their first joint rescue mission took them to Europa Station in the Sol system itself, where a collective intelligence had been trapped in isolation chambers for over a century. The entity existed as a network of linked nodes, but the hegemony had separated each component and placed them in individual cells to prevent communication. Working together, the team developed a new approach to liberation. Raven provided power and protection, Shimmer mapped the facility's hidden systems, David designed the technical solutions, and Emma coordinated medical care for beings whose physiology defied conventional understanding. When they linked the collective intelligence's nodes back together, the entity's first act was to share coordinates for dozens of other prison sites. Each rescue operation taught them new techniques and brought new allies to their cause. The crystalline entity led them to others of her kind. The collective intelligence had maintained hidden contact with enslaved artificial intelligences throughout the galaxy. Within 6 months, their rescue ship had become a fleet. Liberated beings contributed their own vessels and technologies to the effort, creating an alliance that spanned species barriers. They called themselves the Free Concordat, and their mission was simple: find every remaining prisoner of the hegemony and break their chains. The galaxy's established governments watched these developments with growing alarm. The Free Concordat operated outside traditional authority structures, answering to no government and acknowledging no territorial boundaries. They were led by a human couple, a dragon, and a crystalline entity who made decisions by consensus and funded their operations with salvaged hegemony technology. Some species tried to claim jurisdiction over liberated beings found in their territory. Others demanded that the Free Concordat register as an official organization and submit to regulatory oversight. All such demands were politely ignored. The Concordat had learned that freedom could not be granted by authority figures. It had to be claimed by those who were willing to fight for it. David stood on the observation deck of their flagship, watching as the latest rescue operation concluded successfully. They had just freed a family of shapeshifters who had been held in separate prisons for 200 years, preventing them from sharing the collective memories that were essential to their species' survival. Emma joined him at the viewport, carrying a cup of coffee that had somehow become a symbol of human civilization among their alien allies. Several species had adopted the drink despite having no biological need for caffeine, claiming that the ritual of sharing coffee represented human values of community and cooperation. "The news networks are calling us everything from heroes to terrorists," she said, handing him a data pad with the latest reports. "The Terran Senate wants us to register as a humanitarian organization. The Altarian Empire claims we're violating their sovereignty by operating in their space." David scrolled through the headlines without much interest. Politicians and journalists could debate the legal implications of their work, but none of that mattered to the beings they had rescued. What does Raven think? "She says that empires rise and fall, but the bonds between free peoples endure forever. I think that's her way of saying we should ignore the bureaucrats and keep doing what we're doing." Through the viewport, David could see Haven's Rest growing larger as they approached their home base. The old military facility had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. A sanctuary world where dozens of species lived together by choice rather than conquest. The abandoned bunkers had become workshops where dragons shared engineering techniques with artificial intelligences. The empty barracks housed crystalline entities who taught humans how to communicate through light. The old training grounds had been converted to agricultural areas where shapeshifters experimented with new forms adapted for farming. It was chaotic and beautiful and completely unprecedented. Representatives from the galaxy's major powers visited regularly, trying to understand how so many different species could coexist without a central authority or formal government structure. The answer was simple but difficult to accept. When beings chose to work together instead of being forced to submit, cooperation became natural rather than artificial. Raven met them at the landing pad, her scales gleaming in the afternoon sun. She had grown stronger over the months, not just physically but emotionally. The broken, hopeless creature they had found in chains had been replaced by someone who radiated confidence and purpose. "How many this time?" she asked, as the rescue team disembarked. 17, Emma replied. "A whole family group of shapeshifters, plus 3 artificial intelligences who had been used to run mining operations. They're all in medical evaluation now." Raven nodded with satisfaction. Each successful rescue proved that the galaxy's enslaved beings could be found and freed, that the hegemony's legacy of suffering was not permanent. Shimmer has located another site, a gas giant facility where energy beings have been trapped in magnetic containment for 3 centuries. David felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that came with each new mission. The work was dangerous and exhausting, but it was also the most important thing he had ever done. Every being they freed added to the growing network of species who chose cooperation over conquest, healing over hatred. "Then we'd better start planning the next mission," he said. Above them, ships from a dozen worlds came and went from Haven's Rest, carrying supplies and volunteers to rescue sites throughout the galaxy. The old military base had become the heart of something that had never existed before. An alliance, built on choice rather than force, held together by shared values instead of fear. The Free Concordat was proving that another kind of civilization was possible, one where differences were celebrated instead of eliminated, where strength came from diversity instead of uniformity. It was humanity's gift to the galaxy, but it was also the galaxy's gift to humanity, a chance to build something better than empire, something that honored the dignity of every conscious being. David took Emma's hand and watched the sunset paint Raven's scales in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rescues, new opportunities to prove that freedom was not just a human concept, but a universal right. Tonight, they could rest in the knowledge that the galaxy was a little less dark, a little less lonely than it had been the day before. In the distance, Shimmer's crystalline form caught the last rays of sunlight and scattered them in patterns that spoke of hope, gratitude, and the unbreakable bonds between those who chose to stand together against the darkness. The age of chains was ending, and the age of freedom had truly begun.